For me, it's not only not hotspots and not spots in terms of locations, but it's the type of property that's equally as important. So I take Melbourne, a suburb in Melbourne called St Kilda, right? So St Kilda's arguably a blue chip suburb, 5 minutes from the city. Housing prices have essentially doubled in the last 10 years or even shorter. You look at unit prices and they've barely moved in that same time frame. So you might read a report that says St Kilda's going to boom and that's a hotspot and you've got to get in. But if you've only got money for a one-bedroom apartment there, you've sat back in the last 10 years and you're probably better off keeping your money in the bank.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show to help you unlock your full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, freedom fighters. Do you believe in the great Australian dream? Are you chasing it? And is it still relevant? You know, that baked-in, long-held generational desire and expectation of owning your own home on your own block of land that houses your growing stable of cars and toys as your family grows, that's supported by your stable job, all as a symbol of your personal success, which in turn further fuels Australia's love affair with property. But is the great Australian dream still possible? Or is it changing and need reimagining? The fact of the matter is that it's always been changing. The great Australian dream for our grandparents and parents was a very different vision to the one that most of us now expect. And the key word here is expect. Your grandparents and parents' home dreams were likely to be much more humble and smaller than our minimum expectations today. As our lifestyles have continued to improve, so have our expectations. Yesterday's dream home becomes today's minimum standard as we continuously strive for more and better. And lifestyle inflation just keeps lifting the bar so that the Australian dream is increasingly becoming just about beyond our reach. Like a train that's just left the station, the faster and harder we try to catch it, the further it seems to get away. It's a reason that the housing affordability debate has been a never-ending discussion through every decade right from the get-go here in Australia, as Dr. Cameron Murray revealed here on the podcast recently, since way back in 1788 when the first fleeters started settling in Port Jackson, in what was later to become Sydney, over 230 years ago. So, the message there is that the more things appear to change, the more they actually remain the same. So where are we with the notion of the great Australian dream? Well, according to today's returning special guest, the great Australian dream is actually now a fallacy. And in my humble opinion, it's becoming a potential nightmare in the making if you stick to it doggedly without considering the longer-term impacts of your family's future lifestyle. But it's important to stress that the Australian dream isn't dead. It just needs to change. And I absolutely agree with our guest, John Pidgeon, that we need to get creative and evolve our thinking in relation to what it is, as well as what, how, when and why we need to shift our thinking, our expectations, action and approach to achieving your updated and upgraded version of your Australian dream that doesn't all start and end with your own home, but it considers your long-term lifestyle throughout all of its evolving phases and stages. So here's a great quote from John's book that I want you to take to heart and repeat every day. I will do what no one else is willing to do. Often the easiest way to be different is to do the things that other people refuse to do. The traditional path isn't always the easiest or most successful. Very wise words. Now, to help you to put some shape around this and to help you craft your own personal version of your Australian dream and how to achieve it, John has just published his great new book, Sort Your Property Out and Build Your Future, and we're going to be unpacking that today. Now, if you enjoyed John's personal journey on last week's episode, you'll know that he's an accomplished property investor, a property coach through his Solvair Wealth business, a buyer's agent under his Envisage property brand, and a fellow podcast co-host of the popular This Is Property podcast. And now he's adding author to his considerable repertoire of growing achievements. So welcome back, and let's get invested again, John.
Let's do it, Bushy.
Awesome, mate. Now, just to sort of set the scene around this before we get into the book, John, given your years of coverage across the podcast and working with investors, what mistakes do you see hardworking Aussies making with money and property?
Look, I think you touched upon it in the intro, is a lot don't make a start. I think that's the biggest thing that I see going wrong, is that people maybe aren't prepared to sacrifice and work hard enough to get the results they want through, I suppose, not wanting to sacrifice the lifestyle they're living now. So, yeah, there needs to be some give and take in that space. So that's probably the main thing that I see. But also looking at the first asset that they're buying, and the stats show that not many people get to buy their second property, let alone their third. And a lot of that is due to either failure of the first one or, through buying the wrong asset, or just simply not being able to afford to hold it, or just something that they didn't do to prepare themselves right to see the long-term approach. And that's probably the final part, is knowing what the next 8 to 10 years look like for you, not the next 8 to 10 minutes.
Yes, beautifully said. I now want to do the flip side of that. So we've looked at the mistakes. On the other end, what do you believe are the keys to being successful with property, and why?
Over and above everything else, it's mindset. It's a success to everything in life, isn't it? If you've got a positive can-do mindset, you surround yourself with good people, you're an open book for learning and absorption of new knowledge, and you can wake up and turn up every day, you're going to get better results than 99% of the population out there. So that's hands down my most important tip for someone, is just have a good frame. And then from there, I think the rest can fall into place. And then that's not to sound blasé, but we really need to, if we're putting enough work into something, we're going to get pretty good at it. So I think if we're talking assets and we're down in amongst the weeds right now, we'd like to get a component of land, and that's generally what's proven to be consistent over the journey. When we look at things that work and don't work, you'll end up looking at land value and the size of it, and the more you can get of that, generally speaking, you're going to do better.
Beautifully said. Now that's a sort of a great entree to start diving into the book now, John. So, again, to mention it, your great book, Sort Your Money Out and Build Your Wealth. Can you talk to us about why did you write it? What are the key messages, and who's it best suited for?
Yeah, so I never set out to be an author, to be honest, Bushy. It's not something that I enjoy doing, writing page after page and putting it all down on paper. I like writing the odd sentence or two here and there when I've got a thought, but that's about as far as it goes. But I suppose the major incentive for me to write it was, what would my 18-year-old self have wanted when I first become interested in property and to get on that journey of wealth creation? And I tried to write it as though I was back at the start with the 25 odd years of experience that I've had investing personally, the trials and tribulations that I've had, the stories that I've created along the way, but also the experiences through working with others to be able to put something together that was hopefully valuable on the stands for someone.
Yeah, nicely said. Well, I really want to sort of unpack the book a bit now, because I really did enjoy the flow of the book and the way you just sort of cut straight to the chase with the stuff that's important. And I know that sort of part one starts to focus on how to get what you want in terms of the foundations. And you sort of mentioned in that part something that I touched on in the intro. So I'd like you to expand a little bit on your thoughts around why you think the Great Australian Dream's a fallacy, and what can home ownership actually look like now, given some of the strategies you've outlined.
Yeah, it probably a little bit of a headline there, but it's if you strip it right back, the meaning behind it was, well, I don't think we can expect most Australians, especially in Sydney and Melbourne, which is the majority of the country's population, to be able to save a deposit comfortably, handle the mortgage that they want on the asset that they need or want in the location that they were brought up in. And if we go back a step, you talked about previous generations and the cost of living's now increased, et cetera, et cetera. We probably, not many of us were able to buy in the ideal location that we wanted with our first investment, and it was, or with our first purchase that we lived in at least. So I think too many out there are saying, well, it's unaffordable, we can't buy a house, we can't continue our lifestyle. That may be correct in the suburb that they're living now, but it doesn't mean that they can't buy a property of some description. It's just a different version. And like everyone before them, it's really just a case of going out and whether that be rent vesting, whether that be buying a home to live in that's not in their ideal area just yet, but they're taking action to be able to have these building blocks to eventually give yourself the best chance of getting into your ideal location. So it was probably a jab in the ribs for people that maybe thought that that they wanted everything right now.
Yeah, no, extremely well said. Now, that first part of the book goes into some really fundamental stuff. Just to put a little bit of shape around that, again, to whet the appetite of those listening in, can you sort of summarise for us what are the best ways to shape the right mindset, form the right habits, and set appropriate goals as the key kickoff?
Yeah, I'm really big on habits, Bushy. I think everyone likes to set a goal, a New Year's resolution, whether that be health, whether it be work, whether it be leisure, hobbies, whatever it might be. But generally, a lot of those goals go missing and by the wayside because we don't have habits. And those habits, just like cleaning your teeth and flossing and seeing the dentist every 6 months, you're going to have reasonable teeth. Same thing happens with any property goals or wealth creation. It's like, if we're doing things consistently, habitually, it becomes second nature. We gain confidence, we gain knowledge, we have a great mindset as a result of that, and then combine that with surrounding yourself with a good team of people. It's actually hard to get it wrong when you combine all those things together. It's like a pre-season in sport. You put in the hard yards through that pre-season period, and by the time round one comes, it's actually not an issue. It's just natural that you're going to do well.
Yeah, well said. You give a really good 8-point plan for investing in property in the book. Can you sort of give us a quick summary of the key elements of that?
Yeah, when the publishers, Wiley, saw that, they came to us and said, hang on a minute, if you put those 8 points in the first chapter like you've done, you're going to blow one up and they'll put the book down and never pick it up again. So we had to sort of revise that a little bit, and we've filtered those 8 points right through the book, which now looks and makes it a lot easier to read. But the 8 points come about because I think too many investors put too much focus on location. And for me, the location is actually the last part of those 8 points. Does that mean it's not important? Absolutely, it's important, but we've got to look at what's in our control first. So let's look at how much deposit we've got, what we're loaning at, look at how much the banks will actually lend us, look at what our overall strategy is. Do we want capital growth? Do we want cash flow? Do we want a combination of both, and how much? Look at, is it a long-term buy and hold? Is it a renovation flip? Look at the buying entity. Look at other things that don't involve us jumping on realestate.com first and foremost, because that's what all of us do. We get excited and knock off at work, go home, jump on realestate.com, sit there for 3 hours, start in Adelaide, end up in Albury, and get more confused than when we first started. So let's get our all of those indicators right, including the yield we need, the cash flow, the type of property that we think is going to work for us. And then the last part is the important part of location. But as a result of that, we've eliminated a lot of locations around the country because we've already got a pretty succinct plan as to what is going to suit us, not the other way around.
Absolutely music to my ears, John. I think we sing from the same song sheet when it comes to that. It's getting the right things in the right order. So rather than, as you well said, pick up the phone and start scrolling through realestate.com and domain as the very first thing, I often say that's probably the last thing you need to be doing, because we need to get everything aligned to give you some confidence around what that needs to look like. So love you sharing that with us. I now sort of want to get into part 3 of the book, because again, there's some good stuff in there as well around getting onto the ladder. Again, just to kick that off, what and how do you think is the best way to get on the property ladder?
Yeah, well, look, we've spoken about action and mindset, and those things are non-negotiable, of course. It's got to be your version that's going to work for you, instead of looking at what everyone else is doing and reading the glossy brochures and magazines. I think getting on the ladder can come in all shapes and forms. And I spoke about it last episode, where my first purchase was regional Victoria because I knew it. Is that right or wrong? Don't know, but I took action, and that's probably the most important part of it. So you'd look at it and say, righto, realistically around the country, what sort of dollars do I need to lend, and what deposits do I need to have to get into the markets? And generally speaking, in today's dollars, you're probably looking somewhere between 400 to 500 as a starting point, I think, to buy a reasonable asset. So if we strip that back, we need probably 40K, 10% deposit plus stamps. Let's call it 60K overall, with other costs maybe on top of that. So that might be the goal for someone, is to say, right, how many months is it going to take me to save 60 grand? And then I'll come up for air when I do. I'm not getting on realestate.com before then, but I'm designing a strategy in the meantime that's going to work at that price point. And I think that the mistake that a lot of investors might make is, if I don't buy something for $1 million, it's not going to go up in value. The $1 million property started somewhere, didn't it? It was a 500K property at one stage in its journey. So I believe you're better off getting in earlier than waiting another 4 or 5 years to try and save that deposit for that $1 million property.
Yeah, it's great advice there. Again, in that section of the book, you got a great discussion on property hotspots and not spots. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's just a headline, Bushy, isn't it? Like, everyone wants to read the hotspots and not spots around the country, and some marketers do a very good job of naming and shaming those sort of different locations. So I thought I'd better throw it in there. But yeah, look, for me, it's not only not hotspots and not spots in terms of locations, but it's the type of property that's equally as important. So I take Melbourne, a suburb in Melbourne called St Kilda, right? So St Kilda's arguably a blue chip suburb, 5 minutes from the city. Housing prices have essentially doubled in the last 10 years or even shorter. You look at unit prices and they've barely moved in that same time frame. So you might read a report that says St Kilda's going to boom and that's a hotspot and you've got to get in. But if you've only got money for a 1-bedroom apartment there, you've sat back in the last 10 years and you're probably better off keeping your money in the bank.
Yeah, well, again, music to my ears, John. I talk about that repeatedly. It's not about chasing the location. It's the right sort of property in that location that has the scarcity and limited supply and high demand that people want. It's going to drive the growth if that's one of the important criteria that you're looking for. So extremely well said there. I now want to sort of jump into an area that again, I don't think gets enough attention. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and that's due diligence. And the buyer's agents in particular talk a lot about due diligence, but there's due diligence and there's due diligence. So I'd love for you to talk about, from your perspective, both from the education and the buyer's agent's perspective with your own business, what due diligence do property buyers need to undertake to find quality properties, both from an investment and an owner appeal perspective? Because from my own perspective, if you're an investor, you're still looking for owner-occupier appeal. If you're an owner-occupier, you've still got to buy it like it's an investment because it's going to have that opportunity down the track. What are the key things that you focus on? And in particular, I'd like you to focus on the the forward-looking parameters, because history is history. Yes, it gives us some thoughts, but we're really looking at where's this property going to go in this area long term. What are the key things that you look at in that perspective?
Yeah, so those things you mentioned there are spot on. I think you can look at history and you get a pretty good indication of what something's done, but is it going to repeat in the future is questionable. But look, we probably look at macro indicators on a larger scale, which might be things like your population in the area and the forecast for growth in that area. Does that mean that property prices can go up because of that? No, you can have oversupply because every developer wants to build there. But it's a starting point. You look at the infrastructure changes. Where are governments spending their money? They've got satellite cities that they want to build. Where are they putting their money? And then obviously diverse economies and looking at those. So it's not just a one-horse mining town, for example. So we look at that on a larger scale. But then the micro indicators are the ones that really excite us, because everyone can potentially pick a location, but it's buying a superior asset within that location that really excites us and or me and my team. And we're all investors that love to buy property as though we're buying it for ourselves when dealing with clients. And I think like your little things like no busy roads and no major slope and flood and bushfire, being wary of those things. But we also look at within the locations your unemployment rates and then we can look at things like owner occupier versus investor ratios and what percentage of that, because we want to be, when we're buying an investment, we want to be surrounded by owner occupiers because they generally look after their plates a little bit better. No disrespect to tenants, but that's generally what happens. And they'll stay there for a longer journey. We also look at owner-occupier percentages owned outright, right? Because in a downturn or higher interest rates, they don't even have to worry about that because they've got no mortgage, and which is arguably someone's biggest expense in their life. So they're just some, like there's hundreds of different little things on a micro level that we look at when identifying a particular location and then a particular asset. But then the fundamental of, well, what sort of land component has it got? What can we do with that to add value? Generally, the three big indicators for us are buy at discount, add some value, and capital growth. The first two are in your control. The last one's out of your control. So I think in saying all that, yes, we're gunning for capital growth, but if we can get some sort of discount and add some value to an asset on the way through, then you're insulating yourself from any sort of failure or downturn, generally speaking.
Yeah, extremely well said. Now, part 4 of the book dives into the property investment arena, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but I'd love for you to sort of focus in on the key bits and give us a quick rundown on how best to set up a long-term property investment plan to build a well-performing portfolio.
Yeah, you've probably got to have the end in mind, Bushy. I think, like I mentioned in the last episode, you buy at a $2 million goal, exposure to real estate. So you might put something out there, and you know that if you're going to run a marathon, it's 42.2 Ks. If you just say, well, I'm going to set out and go and run, there's probably a good chance that you'll stop long before you're actually exhausted and your day's done. So same thing with property planning. We need to be looking at what the long-term outcome is and where the end game is for you. And at age 22 or 3 or even age 30 or 35, that's often hard to do. But even if it's just 10 years into the future, not a lot of people look enough into their life and say, well, okay, have I got a partner? Am I going to have kids one day? Am I going to send them to school? Where I want to be living? Do I want my own occupier straight off, or do I want to rent vest? And if I rent vest, will I wake up in 2 years and want my own rock? So if that's the case, I need to keep my powder dry and keep some cash aside for that. What sort of deposits am I going in at each time to realize that I might want to buy another one in 2 years. And we're starting to put pen to paper and map that out. Now, we don't actually know exactly how it's going to end up because there's so many variables, but we've got some sort of motivation that says, well, when times get tough in the first couple of years, because invariably they are the toughest in the first few years of investing because the yields are lower and it's all new to us. We can keep our eye on the prize at the end, whatever that may be that you've set out, whether that's to own your home outright in 15 years or whether that's $4 million worth of portfolio. Just put something out there and take action.
Very well said. Now, we've touched on a few of the strategies that sort of embellish that property investment planning. We've talked about reinvesting and some of the other bits and pieces. We talked about new builds and development. We touched on that in the previous episode. But something that sort of pricked my eyes up was your discussion on free vesting. Can you put some shape around that? Because that's a term I haven't seen used very much. So can you expand on that for us?
Yeah, I don't know if I made that up or not, but let's run with it. I think mum and dads don't like me for this, but it's really a strategy where we're staying at home just that little bit longer to save that extra bit of deposit to be able to get into the property market sooner. And I think it's through necessity. It's not the cool thing to continue to stay at home when we're 24 or 25, but I've had so many clients employ this strategy and get themselves 1, maybe 2, even 3 properties before they leave home, whilst their friends are out there renting, paying $300-$400 a week. Like, let's look at $400 a week as a standard rent amount now. That's $20,000 a year. In 3 years, that's a deposit sort of thing. So I think it's a strategy that should be employed and seriously looked at from sort of 18 to 22 at least. But also it's out of necessity because of the ability of to save a deposit and the cost of living that's so extreme today because we've got a shortage of housing pushing rents up.
Beautifully said. I don't think it's just restricted to 18 to 22-year-olds either, John, because I can say from first-hand experience, I had the unfortunate exercise of my first marriage going belly up. And I got out with a car and cassettes. That's all I had to my name at the tender age of 33. I put my tail between my legs. I moved back in with mum and dad, and I went hell bent on getting the deposit to get back into property. And that's where my own property investment journey really started. So I wouldn't put an age limit on the free vesting exercise, mate. I think it's got applicability depending on what your life situation is. But beautifully said. Now, the other thing that before I get into the second round of the ambush series that we always like to jump in here on Get Invested, wouldn't be a property podcast and given you're a buyer's agent and been active in the industry for a long time, what's your read on what is likely to happen with property in the medium to long term moving forward? To give us your read on the opportunities and what we need to be looking out for.
Yeah, look, I think I'm expecting a pretty buoyant type of property markets around the country for the next couple of years, to be honest, Bushy. I think that the interest rates increases have pretty much stalled and we will see some sort of retraction at least in the next 6 to 9 months, I believe. So there's a lot of buyer sentiment starting to come back already. And the biggest portion of, I suppose, home purchases are upsizes. And upsizes have been sitting on their hands for a while because of the uncertainty. We have to sell one to then buy another. And we don't know what we need to pay for this next one. And there's lack of stock and the list goes on. So once they start getting back into the market, fundamentally there's a lack of stock. And when there's a lack of stock and huge buyer interest, what happens to property prices? They go up. And I don't think many different types of assets and many different locations will actually miss the next couple of years of growth. There are definitely some markets around the country that have gone too hot and they will, some of them have already retracted, but some will retract further. But generally speaking, I think there's a good couple of years of positivity in terms of growth in markets.
Yeah, no, well said. I think if you look at the balance of lifters and draggers, then the lifters are certainly dominating the equation. So that there's plenty of opportunity in that regard, and most of the multitude of factors that influence it are all heading in the right direction. So a good read. That's been an excellent exercise, John. And again, I encourage anyone who's serious about getting into property that grabs a hold of your book, because it really pretty much takes you from end to end on the exercise. I now want to jump into the second ambush round, where again you've got to strap on the blindfold and the cigarette. And to kick that off, John, what's your favourite quote and why?
Of course, it's got to be bite off more you can chew, and chew like hell, Bushy. It's it's always been with me right from the word go, and yeah, my wife's sick of it, me saying it, and the kids are even sick of it now. But it's just you've got to get your hands dirty and get going.
Yeah, no, it's relevant for any time and anything, actually. Now, going back to the literary field for a minute, apart from your own book, what's the top book that you'd recommend we read and why?
Don't want to sound too cliche, but and again, spoke to a group last night about this. The Robert Kiyosaki books really influenced me early days. Rich Dad, Poor Dad to an extent, but then the Cash Flow Quadrant really opened my eyes up into passive versus active income, and I think property aside for a minute, I think it should be, and Kiyosaki's not paying me to say this, but I think it actually should be part of some sort of educational literacy, because it just does give you a good insight into what the world's all about. A little bit Americanized, yes, but still very practical in Australia.
Absolutely agree, and I wouldn't actually be sitting here talking to you today if it wasn't for reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, John. Again, I'm a bit older than you, but I was late to the game, and when I picked that book up in the late 90s and then had the opportunity to go and see him in Adelaide, actually, at the convention centre, that was an absolute penny drop light bulb moment for me, and something I've mentioned a couple of times here on the podcast, but Kiyosaki's actually got a great board game called Cash Flow, and it used to be a Monopoly style game, but you can actually do it online now. So for families, particularly kids, to start getting their heads around the key things and having some fun with this, it's as relevant now as it was when you and I probably first read that book a good nearly 30 years ago. Very good recommendation. There's timeless knowledge in that. And yes, a little bit US-y, but there's still some timeless fundamentals. So thanks for sharing that. Now, different tack altogether, John. If you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would you change about property and investing?
I was actually on a podcast not just before Christmas last year, and we had a conversation around this. Imagine if interest rates for investors were lower than interest rates for owner-occupiers, what that might do to the household crisis in Australia. You might have more investors buying, which enables more people off the streets to go and rent, and maybe helping the government out a little bit along the way.
Spot on. Again, you've touched on something that is close to my heart. The way governments at all levels are villainising investors as the problem rather than embracing them as a solution. I just can't understand why they're being so ignorant and naive, to be honest. But some simple changes like that, given that we've got a massive housing shortage right around the country, actually making it easier for mum and dads to continue to supply property that's going to solve this rental crisis, seems to be a no-brainer. So I'd really appreciate you sharing that. Final one, which is, again, something that is important to both of us, and we've talked about a fair bit during both of the episodes. What's a personal happy habit, a rewarding ritual, or a daily discipline that you employ that's contributed most to your investment success today?
Oh, look, it's probably not just investment success; it's life success, and it's getting up early and beating the traffic. So you've just you get a good start to the day with a positive mindset and do something positive. That doesn't mean turning on a screen, whether that be exercise, whether it be meditation, whether it be having a good conversation with a family member or something like that, that really sets your day on a positive note. I think a lot of society meander into the day, and I'm not a morning person. That's rubbish. Like, you've just got to jump out of bed and start the day well, because generally, if it starts well, more often than not, it'll finish well.
Yeah, absolutely. Timeless advice there, mate. There's no question. I guess to bring it all to a head now and putting together what we spoke about over both of the episodes, to summarise our great conversation, John, what are your key takeaways and must-do actions that people listening in should be jumping on?
Yeah, so I think we always think about when we're listening or being involved in anything, we sit back after it's all finished and say, okay, what did I learn? And now what are my action steps? And what do I need to do differently? So what do I stop and what do I start are probably the key questions that we're asking ourselves. So do I need to start writing down my habits for each day? Do I need to start with a cash flow management plan? Do I need to stop spending so much money and maybe analysing what's happening in my life and having a savings plan? Do I need to start educating myself further? Do I need to read more books? What am I starting and what am I stopping are probably the two things that we need to ask ourselves constantly. And then it's just momentum building, isn't it? And I do harp on about this a lot, but you're taking that action one step at a time, one day at a time, and all of a sudden you look back in 10 years' time and you're like, wow, what did I create? How good is this? It's a really good feeling, and it's actually a feeling of when you actually achieve it, it's not a surprise because you've been living and breathing it for that long. And that's how you also remain humble, because you know you've put the hard work in to get the result that you need for you and your family.
Yeah, it's again some universal principles that apply not only to property but to every aspect of your life in that context, and it really is the combination of all those things we've spoken about, and then just doing the do and keep doing it and don't expect it to happen quickly, because that great quote, we overestimate what we can achieve in a year, but we way underestimate what we can achieve in 10 years. So some great advice there. To close things out then, John, if I ask yeah, sorry, John, go on.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Bush, and to finish off on that, I think another really important one that I see is surround yourself with good people. So many well-intended family and friends put us off taking action and say, oh, that won't work, or that's the wrong time, or you need to think about this, and actually puts doubt into our mind, as opposed to having people around us that just have your best interest because they've been there and done that before us.
Beautifully said, John. To sort of last question, if I ask you to get invested, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, the common answer is invest in property, shares or business. But I think it's really about getting invested in yourself, putting time and effort into yourself, whether that be telling yourself a good story, whether it be educating yourself through reading, listening to podcasts, everything where we're looking at ourselves and saying, where can I improve and what can I do better? Investing in yourself more so than investing in particular assets to begin with.
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on. As I've said in the intros, it's a never-ending life journey. So the one thing that I really encourage people to do is rekindle that childlike curiosity that we started our life with, and just get involved, get invested in whatever it is you have an interest in, because that's where your enjoyment and your success is going to come from. Look, John, it's been a great conversation. We've only really scratched the surface, and it's absolutely crystal clear that that country upbringing has led us on very similar paths, and we have very similar beliefs, which is refreshing in the property arena, quite frankly. So for those in the audience that have really resonated with you and your message, how can listeners find out more and get more involved with you, John?
You can listen to our podcast, This is Property. As you mentioned, Bushy, we've got Buyer's Agent, Envisage Property, and we've got a coaching program online and in person, solvairwealth.com.au. So search for my name. You should be able to find both of those. Appreciate you having me on. But Bushy, it's been a good chat.
It's been a great chat. And again, thanks again for taking the time to both inspire and motivate us with your own journey, but also your new book and all your words of wisdom across the last 2 episodes. And I'm actually keen to keep that conversation going, John, moving forward. But before we close, if anyone would like to delve deeper into your specific property needs or challenges, book in with me for a personal solution sessions by going to knowhowproperty.com.au and hitting the purple book appointment button in the right-hand corner of the homepage, and then select the personal solution session option, where you'll have my complete and dedicated and undivided attention. In addition, I'd need to ask everyone a big favour that will only take a couple of seconds of your time, because currently about 70% of you that watch the Property Hub podcast don't subscribe. So if you've ever enjoyed our shows and videos following the countless hours that myself and my support team put into preparing and producing these episodes, can you please do us a massive favour and hit the like and subscribe button now? It helps the Property Hub channel more than you know, given the platform algorithms that beaver away in the background. And I promise you that the bigger our Southern Cross Isle Stereo channel continues to get, the better the guests are going to get and the better your investment learnings will get. And to continue these great conversations, join us on the Property Hub Collective Interactive Facebook community by clicking the link in the show notes. And that's about enough for me. So thanks again, and thanks for getting invested, John.
Thanks, Bushy. All the best.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. And don't leave yet until you've taken the next step towards living by design by getting my award-winning book, Get Invested, absolutely free when you sign up at knowhowproperty.com.au or bushymartin.com.au. And finally, make sure you subscribe to Property Hub to get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration, along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's leading property show for red-hot property investing news and insights, direct from industry leaders and influencers. Remember to always get invested in your knowledge, and I look forward to seeing you next time.